recording will get going.
Yeah, I've just got that firing up now. Okay, that's
Fit to roll?
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Welcome, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, to this virtual meeting of the Waverley Executive Committee. You probably mostly know me now, but my name is John Ward. I am the leader of the council and obviously will be chairing this executive meeting. I'm supported this evening by a number of officers: Chief Executive Tom Horwood, Strategic Directors Graham Clark and Annie Wrighton, Head of Policy and Governance Robin Taylor, and the Borough Solicitor Daniel Bainbridge. Please make use of the hands up feature as we normally do. Please keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. And if any member loses contact, we will pause the meeting to try and get you back in again. And if we lose the web feed, we will stop the meeting until we can get it going again. Apologies for absence, Fiona. I gather there are none.
There are none. We're just waiting for Councillor Palmer to join us.
Okay, well, let's hope he will join us soon, but in the meantime, we will crack on. The minutes of our last meeting held on the 2nd of March have been published. I haven't received any notification of errors. Is it your will that I shall sign those at a later date?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? None received before the meeting. Anything popped up in the meantime? Thank you. No. Questions from members of the public? I understand there is one question from Charles Collins, and Councillor MacLeod, you are going to read the question and the answer.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you to Mr. Collins for his question. The question is, given the closure of the LPP2 public consultation 2 months ago and the local development scheme indicating adoption of LPP2 by January/February 2022, what deadline has been set to submit LPP2 to the Planning Inspectorate for examination? Are you able to advise what committee stages are required in advance? The Council's response is this. The Council has received over 1,100 comments as a result of the public consultation, which have raised a number of different issues. These are currently being considered. The Council will submit the local plan for its examination as soon as this has been done, with the intention that the plan will still be adopted in early 2022. However, if this requires a change to the timetable, we will set this out in an updated local development scheme that will be published. The decision to submit the local plan for its examination is a decision of the full Council following the recommendation of the Council's executive. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. The next item is questions from members, and I understand that there are none. Is that correct, Fiona?
That's correct, Leader.
Thank you very much. Item 6, leaders and portfolio holders updates. I'll keep mine fairly short, but it's quite important. As members will know, and I think possibly members of the public as well, the government has been deaf to our pleas to be allowed to continue with some form of remote or hybrid meeting after the 6th of May. Various people are blaming various others, but it appears that the Leader of the House is unwilling or unable to give time to a motion that would extend our ability to use remote meetings or even hybrid meetings. Therefore, after the 6th of May, any council decisions will have to be made in the council chamber by people who are present in the chamber. This has clearly raised health issues for a vast number of councillors across parties, such that it is very likely that any meeting we attempted to hold in May would be inquorate. We have therefore pulled forward as much business as we possibly can, And we are having an additional executive next week on the 6th of April in order to get things ready for council. So we will have council as on your calendars on the 20th of April, but the agenda will be much fuller than we would have wanted. And mayor making has been brought forward from the end of May to the 27th of April, so that although it won't be as obvious a festive occasion, if you like, as it would be if it were live, it will allow us to get the business done and to start our new mayoral and councillor year in an orderly fashion. We are looking at ways that we can satisfy ways of moving forward for meetings, but at the moment, May looks a very doubtful time where we could have a proper meeting of council. And obviously, councillors who are concerned about their health, we have different age profiles between our various parties. And as vaccines are rolled out, we would probably have a non-proportionate amount of people willing to come to council meetings. But we are seriously looking at that. But really, the only thing we can do at the moment is pull as much of our information and our decisions forward into April as we possibly can. So that's all I really want to say on that matter. And I will now move to Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. Good evening, everyone. Just very quickly, the government over the last month has been running a consultation on the future of new homes bonus, which is a financial matter, but obviously it's not entirely unconnected from planning. We've been putting our response together. The consultation takes the form of 30 questions, which from our point of view, betrayed a curious lack of understanding of the planning process. It, for example, doesn't tackle the variance between planning approvals and build-outs. It doesn't seem to understand that planning approvals are granted on their merits rather than response to government financial incentives. Local plans don't even get a mention until question 28 out of the 30. There's no discussion on the conflict between viability and the delivery of affordable housing. And many of the numbers in it quoted, numbers and percentages, seem to be arbitrary, if not completely random. So that will be fed back into our response, which will be going in on the 7th of April when that's due. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader. My update will be fairly brief. We've got the bins policy and the electric vehicle strategy on the agenda this evening, and we will discuss under the electric vehicle strategy the impact of petrol and diesel emissions on our overall carbon footprint. That is, it's very clear that although highways and transport are not a direct responsibility of Waverley Borough Council, our support for that kind of modal shift in transport towards more active, more sustainable transport, something which is very, very important to our carbon neutrality action plan. And therefore, what I do want to update colleagues on this evening is the appointment of a transport projects officer who joined the sustainability team on Wednesday of last week, and his name is Tom Lancaster. He's very, very experienced in the whole area of transport and sustainable transport, and he will be a great asset to our team, and he will make a great contribution to our work on reducing carbon emissions and promoting active and sustainable transport in Waverley.
Thank you. Councillor Rosamond.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to report that Terry Taubney, who's the Tenants Panel Chair, been advised he is to become a member of the National Housing Ombudsman Resident Panel, which means Waverley will now have 2 representatives on that panel, and they both will be part of our new Housing Complaints Group, and therefore will have local and a national perspective on how that group works. Unfortunately, I was unable to attend the Tenants Panel annual All Tenants Open meeting as I was suffering from the ill effects of my COVID jab, but I'm told it went really well. And there were more than 30 tenants attending who gave some constructive as well as some critical feedback. Hugh Wagstaff, as Head of Housing Operations, has prepared a leaflet which will be going out to all of our tenants concerning the repair and maintenance service with the next rent statements. At the meeting, there were both good and bad stories. Tenants complimented the customer services team, commenting they were polite, courteous, and a credit to Waverley, which is great to hear. However, they also highlighted problems with delayed appointments, missed appointments, and incomplete works. The team and contractors take this very seriously, and they're working really hard to meet our tenants' expectations. Obviously, the pandemic has made things very difficult, but they're constantly looking, reviewing, and seeing how we can work better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. A brief report first in Brightwells. We're having our next Brightwells board meeting with Crest and Surrey tomorrow. And we received a pretty lengthy progress report from them today, which we'll be going through with them tomorrow. But the overall picture is that they're still on track to open the scheme in September. We'll be talking to with them about how they're doing in terms of securing tenants for the retail units and the restaurant units. So we'll report back on that once we're here tomorrow. There are a few other things worth mentioning on Brightwells. Firstly, Marks and Spencers have indicated that they would be interested in opening their shop, their Simply Food shop, a little bit earlier than September. So that will be discussed with them. So they might be opening late summer rather than in the autumn. The leader and myself had a meeting with Real Cinema, and it was a very encouraging meeting actually. They showed us their plans for the cinema, and they're quite impressive. They've reduced the number of seats in the cinema. It's still going to be a 6-screen cinema though, but with more high quality seats and that sort of thing. That they're aiming for an upmarket cinema in Farnham, which is the sort of thing that's likely to succeed in Farnham. So we're pleased to see that. The other things worth mentioning is that Crest are actually making changes to the energy system for Brightwells. They've moved away from installing gas boilers in the flats that they're building to an electrically heated scheme. And this is going to require an additional electrical substation, if you like, on the scheme, and they're applying for permission to that. And they've also decided to put some solar panels on roofs, which we're very pleased about. In fact, we actually, and a member of the public, campaigned about a year ago for them to do this sort of thing, and they said at the time it wasn't possible. And they've now changed their mind, and let's give them credit for that they're going to put in a more sustainable energy system. The other thing worth mentioning, they have actually started now marketing the houses, and we're told, and we'll get a report on this tomorrow hopefully, that they're actually sold some houses off plan, and there's a show flat being developed and that sort of thing. So the housing side seems to be going reasonably well. So that's all I want to say about Brightwells at the moment. In terms of planning policy, I'll just reference one thing. At the last full council meeting, we made a recommendation to the full council to adopt an affordable housing SPD. And this got general approval in the council, but Councillor Mulliner came up with some ideas for strengthening and improving the wording of the SPD to give us a bit more strength in terms of our dealings with developers. And the council agreed that should be considered, and we want to bring that back to the next council meeting in about 3 weeks' time. But in the meantime, a meeting's been set up with Councillor Mulliner and Councillor Rosman and myself and the appropriate senior officers to discuss Councillor Mulliner's ideas and how we can improve the SPD if we can. So that's my report on planning. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to draw the attention of councillors to the public spaces protection order consultation, which will conclude on Friday. There's been quite widespread interest in this, and the feedback I've had directly has been extremely positive, but there is some debate on the exact wording. So if councillors are interested, I very much welcome more input by Friday if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. I'd just like to thank the leisure team for all their hard work with Places Leisure, and I can confirm that the leisure centres are on track for reopening on the 12th of April. Although this will be subject to final confirmation from the government on the 5th of April. And also that the outdoor pitches are now open at the edge. The leisure team have also been working hard on a full programme of activities over the Easter break, with things from football to judo, karate, yoga, dance. It's all outlined on our website, and there's also a return, they're all online, but there's also a return to some outdoor activities with our Explorer Family Trail, and all of these are free and open, obviously, for residents to enjoy. I'm also very pleased to confirm that the final arrangements are being made for the Godalming Park Run at Broadwater, and I know Councillor Follows will be very pleased to hear this, as he has been one of the driving forces behind this. I will be presenting the additional restrictions grant item later on in the agenda, so obviously I'll say a bit more about that then. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Leader. A quick update on one of our most important services administered by Waverley is that of Careline. It is used by 1,660 of the borough's most vulnerable residents. It was called 2,260 times in January, and out of those, 45 occasions an ambulance was called. In February, 1,910 calls were received, and of which 49 required ambulance assistance. It is an important service that gives a peace of mind to its many customers and their families. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader. As portfolio holder for IT, I've mentioned the threat of cybersecurity at these meetings before, and I make no apology for mentioning them again. At Waverley, we have a responsibility to prevent intruders from gaining access to our infrastructure and our residents' data, not to mention the disruption of our systems, which in turn would affect the services we provide to our residents. Last year broke all records for successful hacks in the UK and the number of personal data records stolen. And this year is already showing that the hackers are becoming even more sophisticated. Whilst in the past, some hackers are content to target soft targets like hospitals, schools, and universities, there is now a new breed of hacker seemingly quite capable of gaining access to financial services, airlines, and even the antivirus companies themselves. Over just this last weekend at Waverley, one of our antivirus tools was able to intercept a couple of suspicious-looking files sitting on one of our servers. This server was immediately isolated from the main infrastructure. And as a safety measure, that server remains offline whilst it is thoroughly inspected and given a clean bill of health. So my message remains the same: stay vigilant, stay safe, and if you are suspicious of any email or file, then don't open it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening. I'll very quickly just open by seconding your views entirely as to the non-continuation of our ability to meet virtually from May the 7th. It's something the government's really dropped the ball on, and I hope we'll see sense at the last minute, as they have often been known to recently. In terms of coronavirus, the comms team has been working hard to make sure Waverley residents are updated about the changes that come with the increased movement through the government's roadmap. you'll have seen that the 29th of March brought in new regulations or revised regulations, which the comms team have been working hard to communicate to our residents. We've obviously been also supporting some of the new activities that Councillor Townsend has just been discussing regarding activities over Easter, and there are new dedicated social media and other channels to help promote and support those. And very finally, we've been working with the local towns and parishes in regards to their consultation for the public space protection order that Councillor Palmer was referring to. We've had some really good feedback, both from Godalming Town Council and also from Whitley Parish Council that cover the adjacent area. Thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll now move on to item 7, council tax exemption for young people leaving care, which will be led by Councillor Mark Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. So this is the item on pages 9 to 12 of your packs. A care leaver is someone who's been in the care of the local authority for a period of 13 weeks or more, spanning their 16th birthday. They are young people, they are vulnerable people, and this paper simply proposes that we give them care and support as we can with council tax that they require in these challenging times. The proposal is that any care leaver within Waverley won't have to pay council tax up to the age of 25. The rest of the report speaks for itself. It is a good thing, so I thoroughly recommend it to you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no speakers listed for this. Does any member of the executive wish to speak or add? Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader. I will just echo those words. It is a good thing, and I'm very proud to be voting for it. Thank you, Leader.
Anyone else on the executive wish to comment? In that case, I will put the recommendation to the executive formally. Could I have a red or a green, please? Is that 100%, Fiona?
Yes, I believe it was, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed. So that is passed unanimously. Let's move on to item 8, infrastructure collaboration, insurance. I'm full of infrastructure today. Insurance collaboration, and again in the hands of Councillor Merriweather.
Thanks again, Leader. So this report is on pages 13 to 34 of your packs. We're in a position at the moment where the indicators are that our insurance costs, premium costs, are going to rise significantly in a period when we've referenced now for several meetings, budgetary and otherwise, the need to collaborate. And in this particular case, it's a collaboration proposed with a not-for-profit consortium to benefit from the economies of scale. It's a consortium that's led by the London Borough of Sutton. It involves 9 London boroughs and 5 Surrey districts and boroughs. And the consortium will provide 2 types of benefits: an immediate cost benefit in terms of our premiums, and it'll also provide an administrative benefit. Our resources internally are limited, extremely limited, whereas the Sutton's resources leading this consortium are broader, and we will benefit from their expertise. As far as the program's concerned, we've done a great deal of diligence, and I know Councillor Hegan is going to speak afterwards, but I'd particularly like to thank her for her contribution and her wealth of expertise there, which I think has been very much appreciated. And this is not finally, this isn't a proposal that is forever. It does have an exit strategy if for any reason we decide after a period of time it's not for us. But the main thing is it's collaboration, it's what we're about, and it is something that should bring us financial and other benefits through reducing our costs. So I thoroughly recommend it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I move on, could those who still got their green ticks up, pop them down, please? And Councillor Joan Hegan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leader. And before I start, I'd like to just ask for clarification from the officers. Do we need to concern ourselves at all with counterparty risk? Because in some ways, Sutton will become our insurer. And I want to be clear in my mind before I decide how much to bore you with, as to whether or not there is any way that Sutton can become insolvent, as a commercial insurer might be able to do, or whether they can in some way ring fence themselves from past liabilities, or does the nature of a local authority mean they simply cannot have that escape strategy?
Who would you like to answer that, Councillor Merriweather?
Very thankfully, Peter Vickers is here with us, who's done all of the work, and I think even Graham is nodding his head there as well. So, Peter, if you wouldn't mind, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. So, in answer to can Sutton go bust and get away from this arrangement? No, they can't. As a local authority, you can look at Northamptonshire as an example of an authority that became unstable, financially unstable. The government steps in and they do the appropriate thing to get it back on its feet again. But the situation would be that our arrangement with Sutton in terms of the self-insurance pool element of the insurance would still remain whilst ever there is a claim within the period that we are part of that pool. So in terms of the external insurance policies, which go beyond the self-insurance pool, Waverley are named councils on those policies. So we're not insuring through Sutton, we're insuring with Sutton as part of the economies of scale in terms of the collaboration. So hopefully that's put some clarification there.
Thank you, Peter. I did want to just have that point made clear, because in some ways Sutton will be our insurer, not just up to £250,000. They will be our insurer, not just for the duration of our participation within the collaboration agreement, but possibly for decades beyond that. And the collaboration agreement, amongst many other functions, will essentially be our insurance policy. And it's not like any insurance policy I've ever looked at before, but I think the weaknesses in it play to be a risk more to Sutton than to us, so that I wouldn't cite that as a reason for concern. And I know some of you will know I have approached this proposition with a great deal of scepticism, because insurance is a regulated activity. It's regulated to protect people, amongst other things, from insurer insolvency, but also the effects of poor advice. I still think Sutton should be regulated, but it's an issue for them because there's nothing to stop us purchasing services from an unregulated service provider. The key question for us is, will our claims be paid? And I'm content with the answer that I've just had with regard to that aspect of security. But I think there are risks for us if the self-insurance model does not prove to be sustainable. And in the report, we're told that the self-insurance fund stands at 9 million, which sounds a reassuringly large number. But I think if we move forward with this collaboration, to avoid nasty shocks, we should ask to have sight of the background information on the level of reserves, the actuarial reports, to see if just how well funded those risks are, because it isn't just a case of needing a reserve for a known claim. There needs to be consideration for other potential types of claim that might not have been reported, that might have been reported, but bad facts emerge and they get worse. So I think that to just be told the size of the fund isn't sufficient if we're to be a participant in this collaboration. I think we should know really how long-term stable it looks, because you want early warning of potential problems. And you know, new risks emerge all of the time. It's very interesting to see the latest surge of complaints regarding sexual abuse in schools. Sutton and some of the other collaborators clearly have exposures in the education sector which we don't have historically. That could result in changing dynamics for them. So in terms of the overall proposition, the cost savings available are just too large to be ignored. I think we have to support this recommendation. But in doing so, I think if we're going to become a partner, we should seek to be an active partner, not just get what we're given. I note, for example, it's not in the paper, but I know that subsidence is a risk that Sutton aren't insured for, but which we are. Now, the reason they're not insured for that is they're built on London clay and they will have had a huge number of claims in the past. But I think that in fairness to their user group as a whole, they should perhaps explore whether subsidence cover can be provided to some of the outliers, such as ourselves who reside on sand. I think that, you know, to be in a collaboration, it would be good to try and structure it to be more active than the service proposal suggests. So the recommendation has my support, but I would like to see us try to be more actively involved. There will be potential for new risks to be insured. There's decisions on what are the limits of indemnity. Can the limits of indemnity be eroded by the claims against other authorities? Lots of things that I think at the fringes could be made useful to our advantage. That was all I was going to say.
Thank you, Councillor. Any comments from the executive? Hand up from Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader. Other than very quickly just to say thank you to Councillor Hegan for being so involved and engaged with this. There are opportunities when we've got councillors with professional experience to come forward and really contribute, and I think this is one of those times where that's really been helpful to all of us, and I think particularly to Mark. So I want to very quickly say thank you for that. My subsequent question is just to also ask the officers if they were able to comment on any of on one particular point of Councillor Higgins in terms of proactive engagement with this beyond what the words of the agreement say in the future. Is that something that we are actually able to do within the scope of this agreement? But other than that, I will rarely turn around when Peter Vickers, Graham Clark, Councillor Merriweather and Joan Hegan are all saying that we should vote for something. I would be a fool to turn against such advice. So I will be supporting this recommendation.
Graham Clark, are you on the spot for this answer?
Leader, but only to say that, yeah, very good points. Thank you, Councillor Hegan. And yeah, we would seek to be an active participant in that arrangement. And before the report was written, Peter and I just canvassed the views of some of the other participants, 3 other councils in Surrey who have used the arrangement for some time and received very positive feedback about their experience. So we can actually form a sort of a local network group, if you like, as co-members with some of our authorities that we already have a good relationship with at professional level. But thank you, Councillor Hegan, for your input to this.
Thank you, Graham. I have no other hands up. Do you want to say anything in wind up, Councillor Merriweather, or shall I just put it to the executive?
It's a long meeting, Leader. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members of the executive, you have heard what's been said and seen the proposal. Can I have a red or a green, please?
That's all in favour, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiona. If we could all pop our little greens back in our pockets for a minute, that would be great. And we'll move on to item 9, request for supplementary estimate for UCOG planning appeal and that will be led by Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Leader. This is a consequence of our previous support for the opposition to the UCOG proposal in line with our policy on climate change. As members will be aware, the refusal that was given to the application has been appealed, and as a matter of consistency, we would like to retain some specialist consultants, including landscape services, to represent Waverley's position properly at the appeal. I would ask the executive to support the £30,000 that will be required for this.
Thank you, Councillor. I have one speaker listed, Councillor John Gray.
Thank you, Leader. This application is in my ward. It's a proposal to drill an exploratory well right on the edge of the AUNB, next to two very significant businesses and very close to the Stoverts Hill Gypsy and Traveller site. The residents, the parish councils and the ward councillors do thank the executive for putting this forward and for supporting it. I think the objections that were put forward by Surrey were fairly weak. They weren't the only things discussed at that planning meeting, and I was in attendance of both that meeting and the previous ones, and a lot of other issues were raised, but being a Rule 6 party to this will allow us to strengthen the support and aid Surrey in getting a successful outcome. So my thanks to the executive for making this participation possible. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Steve Williams.
Thank you, and certainly I'd endorse what Councillor Gray has just said, and I know he's put in an enormous amount of work as the ward councillor in marshalling opposition to this proposal. I just really wanted to remind executive of the listening panel that we held when the UCOG application first emerged. The listening panel where evidence was submitted by residents and other organisations to a cross-party panel of Waverley councillors was a highly detailed and highly effective, I think, consultation exercise, and it resulted in the work that Waverley officers subsequently did in relation to marshalling the case against the drilling proposal. It became very clear that the proposal to drill for hydrocarbons in Waverley in Dunsfold was not only intrusive on our beautiful natural environment in the area of Dunsfold and at variance with our own declaration of a climate emergency and Surrey County Council's declaration of a climate emergency. It also breached planning requirements in several important requests. And as Surrey County Council's planning officers did not provide a particularly robust case for this, for the Planning and Regulatory Committee of Surrey County Council at that time, the case put for refusal of the application put to the committee was heavily reliant on the planning case that was put together by our planning officers and arising from our listening panel exercise, and also arising from our subsequent fairly extensive consultation with parish councils and residents groups. Now, as this goes to appeal, it is absolutely right that we should be a Rule 6 party and that we should be ensuring that the right case and the planning case that we have spent so long with the group putting together is put forward to the appeal, and ensure that this outrageous application to drill for hydrocarbons in Dunsfold, which in any other country in the world would be defined as fracking, but is defined in this country as drilling, therefore permissible, should be thrown out. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Follows, followed by Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. And one of the most important aspects of our declaration of climate emergency is our community leadership role and things that we can do to improve that sphere. And for me, that means that we have a duty to exert our community leadership to fight this sort of proposal. And certainly we're joined by Althfold Parish Council, Dunsfold Parish Council, and several large residents groups in doing that. Councillor John Gray's point absolutely spot on. As a Rule 6 party, we're able to introduce new elements and also fight this in a slightly different way. The polite phrase I will use, borrowed from our head of planning service, is that we can be a critical friend to Surrey in this process. To be frank, I agree with you entirely, Councillor Gray, that the reasons given by Surrey for this were quite weak and do need some bolstering. So I will conclude by saying that obviously we will fight this with as much force and as skill as we are able to do, and this will enable us to do that. And thank you, Councillor Gray and others for your support in this. I think it's absolutely the right decision, and I will of course be voting for it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. I have Councillor Townsend, followed by Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. Much of what I was going to say has already been said. However, I would very much like to just say that I support this recommendation. We have been an active participant in the refusal of this planning application, and I very much support the allocation of the funds. And as Councillor Gray has mentioned, Surrey's own defence has not been that robust, and we have the opportunity to strengthen their case. And we also have a responsibility to our residents, and also from our listening panel exercise that we undertook some time ago, it's clear that our residents do not want to see this fracking within Dunsfold, and I do use that term fracking. I know it's drilling for hydrocarbons, but as Councillor Williams has already said, it is really fracking by any other term. And also this supports our climate emergency. And if we are, and as we are an executive very committed to our climate emergency and taking action on that, then we cannot see this taking place within Waverley without doing all we can to support the refusal of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. I just want to comment as Councillor Williams found his frustration. Surrey's procedures didn't allow Waverley or any other local council, including parish councils, to make representations to the planning meeting. So if we are successful, if Surrey is successful with our support and the support of parish councils and so on in opposing this appeal, I just hope that gets recognised by Surrey and they take action to change their procedures so that in future the local councils like Waverley and parish councils can take part. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens, but it certainly should happen. Thank you, Leader. That's all I wanted to say.
Here.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no more hands up. So I will put the recommendation to the executive. Could I have green or red, please?
That's all in favour, Leader.
Thank you very much, Fiona. If you could pop hands back in the pocket for the meantime, that would be great. And we will move on to the next item, which is item 10, a review of refuse and recycling bin provision. And that will be led by Councillor Williams.
Okay, thank you. As with any other policy on environmental matters, we need constantly to be reviewing and questioning what we're doing and why we are doing it. And clearly any bins policy needs to be placed in the context of our overall waste strategy and where that fits into the emerging picture, the national waste strategy. I will be bringing a new waste policy to executive later in the year. It's critically important that this policy is brought to the executive fundamentally for two reasons. The first is the budget for purchasing bins is under serious pressure after significant overspend last year. And because of the financial pressures the council is under, resulting, as we know, from the failure of central government to fully make good the increased costs and lost revenues for local government arising from the pandemic. The second reason is that we need to be making sure that our policy towards waste collection is consistent with our declaration of a climate emergency and our carbon neutrality action plan. Policy is not about charging for bins and food caddies, as claimed on Radio Surrey this morning. It is about charging for replacement bins unless they are damaged by our contractor, in line with the practice of councils elsewhere, just in Surrey, across the country. So following the I thought, quite a distorted report on BBC Surrey this morning, which was dealt with very effectively by Richard Homewood, has put that myth to rest. Policy, however, is also about creating that gradual shift towards smaller residual waste bins, the grey bins, because the more we recycle, the smaller and smaller our residual waste stream becomes. And that is something we wish to encourage. Our policy is also about ensuring that the bins themselves are sustainably produced. And although the current grey bins are made from recycled materials, blue recycling bins are not. So we are therefore switching to new recycling bins largely made from recycled materials themselves. So essentially, we need to agree this paper before executive to enable us to provide suitable and sufficient bins to meet our meet requirements of residents, to ensure financial prudence in the context of the current financial crisis and the current financial climate, and to help meet council's climate emergency response and the commitment to move towards zero waste solutions. So I'd urge that we would support this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor. I have two speakers registered for this. I have Councillor Coburn, followed by Councillor Gray. So Councillor Coburn, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leader. Do I have to say climate emergency more than once? Is it sort of compulsory at this meeting? What I was actually going to start with, Councillor MacLeod, terribly sorry, but I didn't hear Swift bricks. We support this policy. It came into ONS, and obviously, you know, one has to support it. Bins and planning are the two things that fill most of our days as councillors, as we all know. And I think most people believe that they pay enough tax to cover the cost of services. I think people are very surprised when they actually see the breakdown of figures. So yes, I'm all for putting in a policy that brings in some income and that also thinks about a waste strategy. But communication is going to be all in this. This is why we couldn't come up with one definitive response at Environment ONS. Those of you with long memories will remember that in 2007, the Lib Dems lost Waverley on the fortnightly bin collection. People hated it and told them they hated it. And whenever you're trying to change behaviour, it's a matter of how you do it. I instinctively hate telling people what to do. I don't think it's the way to take people with you. I don't think it's the way to lead. And we are going to have to be very, very careful on this, because most of us are somewhere in the middle. We're not zealots. In fact, I get so bored, as I'm sure everybody else does, with being lectured about climate emergencies and the environmental changes, where they're sitting there with their mobile phone, which we know is environmentally dangerous, and then perhaps a bottled plastic bottle of water and a pre-packed sandwich in the other hand. We're all in this together, and we've all got to be consistent in what we're trying to achieve here. We want to reduce waste. That's not an issue. We don't want, or at least I hope we don't want, to tell people exactly what to do. In fact, there were 2 or 3 points in the debate and also in the report that just sort of slightly amused me. People using green caddies for other purposes. I've spent days trying to work out another purpose for them, but maybe I'll get round to it. Ours got damaged definitely by the men. I mean, we haven't replaced it. We just use the cracked caddy, but they are not particularly robust. And I do think that's perhaps something we should look at. I'm not for quickly reducing the size of bins. I can't believe that the entire population in Waverley is working out how to fill their grey bins. I just don't think they work like that. And I just don't think if you've got a bin of whatever capacity, you think, oh, better put something else in. So I can understand what you're trying to achieve. A little image comes of these gradually shrinking grey bins until you've got a thimble at your front gate. But I really am a little bit worried about being too bossy on this. I really am. I think most of us are trying to do our best. Most of us are trying to do exactly what we say, reduce waste, reuse where we can, recycle where we can. But I do think you've got to take people with you on this. We've lost them before, and I think we could lose them again if we start telling them it's all their fault. They're the ones that are doing everything wrong. Take them with us, and then I think people will do it. We don't wear our seatbelts anymore because anyone tells us to. We do it because it makes sense. And I think this is something that we have got to handle very carefully. It will not be as simple if history teaches us anything, just to tell people, you can't do this, you can do this. It doesn't work that way. If we make life difficult for any form of reducing or recycling or reusing, we create new problems, and we know that too. So fully supportive of this, fully supportive of what it's trying to achieve. But I think communication is going to be the key. And if we communicate this badly, I don't think it will go down well. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Leader. I'd say up front that I'm very grateful for the report. It told me a lot of things I didn't know, and it was very clear what the issues are. My reason for raising this today, and I have advised the portfolio holder that I was going to raise this question, is I found the figures in the paper very confusing. What I look for is a simple value for money statement. If I give you some examples, on page 42, you've got a total cost there of 118,000, but that includes the brown bins. Now, the brown bins themselves produce a surplus of some £500,000. In paragraph 6.4, you make a statement that half the bins issued produce a revenue. Well, actually, you don't. You say half the bins don't produce a revenue, but what you don't do is give any indication of what that revenue is. You also make the point in there of the Section 106 income pays for the new bins for new houses, but you haven't actually given a dimension of what the 106 bins revenue is to us for us to look at it in relationship to the cost. You also say in 10.1.5, paragraph 10.1.5, that the significant extra staff will be needed to address some of the issues that Councillor Coburn have raised, which is the response we're going to get back from residents and to make this policy work, but you haven't costed that additional staff. I would like to see a simple value for money statement, which actually spells out all the things. I think the ingredients are there, but some of the figures weren't there for me. I couldn't pull it together to myself. So I would say to the leader, to the portfolio holder, please try and improve the way that you summarise the financials. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Paul Follows.
Thank you, Leader. I will start by agreeing with Carol on Councillor Coburn on one particular point, which is it is extremely important how we communicate, and because you can't do any kind of behavioural change without that. So it's not only important how we communicate, it's important that we measure that engagement, which is what our comms engagement strategy envisages with this type of communication. So I will give that reassurance up front. We will be thinking about how we communicate this. And certainly when it comes to looking at some of the media that goes around this, we need to make sure that the core messages are clear and upfront. And certainly where the media doesn't help us by reporting one particular slant of it, we need to be out there front and centre correcting that, which is what I suspect Councillor Williams and I will be doing quite a lot of the next couple of days. Where I'm going to deviate slightly, we're definitely not telling anybody what to do here. At the end of the day, there's clearly a financial driver to this. We are all, I think, as councillors, we would love to provide everything all the time, but obviously we live in a financial universe where that's not possible, and we certainly live in one where the funding structure that local government operates in is so constrained that we really have to pick our battles. Climate emergency, and I'll say it again just because I know I'm going to say it twice just in the same speech, just to, you know, maybe be a bit annoying. Climate emergency is something that is an emergency, so it's important, which is why we're using this as a topic for us to focus on. I completely support what the portfolio holder here is doing. It makes sense. I think when residents, when we explain it to residents and why we're doing it, I think it will make sense to them too. I don't think that I should sit here and reflect upon that the last Lib Dem administration lost an election because of doing the wrong policy. They lost it because they didn't explain it properly. So that's what we need to do and take that very seriously. I don't think I have a natural human right to create as much waste as possible and have somebody else come pick it up, just as I don't believe I have a right to drive a petrol or diesel car and pollute as much as possible. And before I get the inevitable question back, no, I'm not being a hypocrite. I don't own a car, I don't drive, I use public transport, or I walk if I have to. And really, we have to start making these changes. Some of it is leading by example, some of it is leading by example as a council. This is obviously driven by a financial need as well, so it's a kind of no-brainer. So I'm glad, Carol, that I can agree with you on one last thing, which is that I entirely support the aims and objectives of this particular motion, and I'll be voting for it. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. I have Councillor Townsend, followed by Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to say that I very much welcome the recommendations as outlined by Councillor Williams, and I'm sorry that Councillor Coburn is a bit bored with the climate emergency being stated again and again, but this is one of the biggest challenges that face us, and therefore I will make no excuses for mentioning it several times probably during this speech. I would also like to say that we do have a lot of older residents within Waverley, and I think they will very much welcome having the 140 litre bins. And I know that it was introduced in Horsham, and as my mum lives in Horsham, I can say that my mum very much welcomes having a smaller bin to wheel out. And I think that this is a really good opportunity to provide that extra service to our residents. I think that bearing in mind that Horsham now also has the lowest residual waste in West Sussex, that also shows that this is a successful policy for them as well, or a successful service for them. Whilst I appreciate Councillor Gray's comments about the figures, I would say that, I don't remember ever seeing a simple value for money statement in any reports since I've been on Waverley. So although I would welcome them, indeed, I think that is something that perhaps has been long outstanding. And yes, whilst I don't think the figures are that confusing, because on page 42, the figures are split up between the sort of black bins and the brown bins. However, yes, a value for money statement might be a welcome progression for the council. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. I only have left Councillor Palmer. Perhaps you would like to sum up, Councillor, and then I will move to the recommendation.
Yes, I'd like to support the proposal. This is a delicate area, as has been said by previous speakers, but we need to move forward both on the climate emergency front and also on our financial position. And it makes sense that we are taking a measure which is sufficiently phased not to have a confrontational approach, but which nonetheless offers measurable progress. Now, we're modeling ourselves on the principle of our previous great leader, David Cameron, who recommended the nudge approach. And I think that that is probably more than the telling people what to do. We're encouraging people to move in the direction that will benefit us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams, do you want to have the final word on this one?
Yeah, very briefly, just sort of picking up one or two of the points that have been made. Climate emergency, I make no apologies for reminding us of the climate emergency. It is a top priority for this council. It should be a top priority for everybody. And when I hear remark that environment overview and scrutiny, the one councillor that said that the climate emergency is not for everyone, I'm afraid disagree. The climate emergency is for everyone. It involves everybody. So we do need to address those climate emergency issues. I think Councillor Palmer just raised the very important point that actually what we are about is nudging behaviour. We are not telling people what to do. And as Councillor Follows points out, the communication of our messages is actually very significant. It's something that we're giving a lot of attention to. So far as the criticisms in terms of the lack of costs and benefits in the paper, I felt actually the paper was actually quite detailed. Costs and benefits set out very clearly in paragraphs 4.6 and 4.7 and in the table on 6.1. I mean, we have spent this last year £76,019 on waste and recycling containers, exceeded our budget by 40,000, and in contrast, the current policy only generated about 15,000. We have to do something about that gap. We have to do something about the financial reality. And in doing so, we wish to address our climate emergency and our commitment towards a zero waste policy. And that's exactly what this paper is doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Members of the executive, can I put the 4-part recommendation to you, and can I have a green or a red, please?
Thank you, Leader. That's all in favour.
Thank you very much, Fiona. If we could cancel our greens for the moment and move on to the next item, which is a property matter, plot 5, Wheeler Street Nurseries, and that is in the hands of Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. So this is on pages 61 to 70 of your packs. It does include some exempt material. In essence, it's an enabling measure that follows up some housekeeping really on the delivery of some affordable units under a section 106 agreement, and it is for us to grant the lease to 2 buildings, 2 garages on an HRA site. Thank you very much.
Thank you, councillors. I have no councillors down to speak on this. Does anyone on the executive wish to comment? Right, thank you very much. I will put the recommendation formally to the executive. Can I have a red or a green, please?
That's all in favour, Leader.
Thank you, councillors. If you could pop the greens away, we will move on to the next item, which is item 12, electric vehicle strategy, and that is in the hands of Councillor Williams.
I'll just start, Leader, by reminding people that there's a climate emergency on, and our entire planet is at risk, and it's a top priority for this council to reduce carbon emissions across Waverley, aiming at a net zero 2030 target. And we know that half the carbon emissions across Waverley are down to petrol and diesel driven vehicles. So it's a top priority to reduce vehicle emissions and promote a dramatic modal shift in our methods of transport between now and 2030. It is imperative we do so. Part of this strategy must be to promote electric vehicles. I mean, if you look at the graph on page 84 of your papers, it shows what is actually very welcome, exponential shift towards electric vehicles across Waverley since 2010. And we've got to make it easy for that exponential shift to continue as we move to the middle years of this decade. And that means that we need to be promoting the use of electric vehicles in all the ways that are described in the paper before you, and in terms of provision for electric vehicles in terms of EV charging points. And we need to be not just making provision for the electric vehicles that already exist, we must be ahead of the curve, anticipating and shaping demand. And that's fundamentally what this paper is about. And for that reason, I recommend it to executive.
Thank you, councillors. I have no, sorry, I do have a speaker, but I beg your pardon. I have Councillor Carol Coburn.
Sorry, I'm turning myself completely. I think you're missing the point, not of the electric vehicles, but Councillor Townsend, I was brought up with loads of phrases. One of them was beware the zealot, and I think that's absolutely important. We have to take a breadth of opinions. We cannot claim to have the monopoly of wisdom. And the other one is fine words, butter no parsnips. I could say the words 100 times and it wouldn't make any difference to the environment that I have been fighting for throughout my entire adult life. But I don't need words repeated and repeated and repeated to tell me, or anybody else for that matter, that there's a slight problem. You know, I think we get it. I do think we get it. What I don't get is this strategy. I have to be honest. And I really would like sort of some, I'm not opposed to it. I'm certainly not opposed to better vehicles, electric vehicles and all of that. I have no problem with that. Why do we not have a petrol pump on every corner? Why do we not have a petrol pump at every house? I really don't understand what we're doing here. I really don't get it. I know for as long as I've been sitting on the planning committee and electric vehicle charging has been part of that, we used to have a lovely councillor on called David Hunter. Some of you will remember him. And even if some poor person was applying for a porch, he'd be saying, we must have an electric vehicle charging point. You know, he was absolutely fervent in his belief, and we all supported him. So I don't have a problem with electric charging points being put in. I do wonder what Waverley's role in this is. Yes, up to a point we can be ahead of the curve. And at the moment, it's not costing us a great deal of money. But I do worry about it. The car manufacturers are leading the demand. Don't pretend we're not leading the demand for electric vehicles as councillors. We can certainly support it, but we're not leading it. It's being led by car manufacturers. And I do sometimes wonder what we're actually achieving here and whether we've thought about the implications of some of these public vehicle charging points. But my real issue with this, and it's an issue that's repeated over and over again at the moment with this executive, is that you don't seem to go beyond your little group of discussion to say, well, why isn't that suitable in Farnham or Cranley or Dunsfold or anywhere else? And I keep hearing of things, and poor Richard Homer, he's still here, he's not disappeared. He's always hearing this. But some of what is intended to go into our conservation area, because it fits in with what you as an executive think is the most important thing in the world. And it is totally unsuitable for the area that it's being put in. So what I would like to ask this executive, one, why are we doing it? and what's the difference between electric fuel and electric charging and fuel? Because I just don't get why we're sort of neurotically putting vehicle charging points everywhere. But I also want to know why you don't come and talk to the town council, why you don't look at documents that relate to a town or a village. I'm talking about Farnham, but it happens everywhere, so that you don't make mistakes. We have got a Farnham Conservation Area Management Plan. We do not want ugly things in our car parks. I don't care whether they're improving the climate. I'm sorry. If they don't fit in, some people think aesthetics are important, and you can't dismiss them just because they don't have 100% of your beliefs. And that's the point I'm trying to make with what I'm saying tonight. Fine words, butter, no parsnips, as my mother would say. Do something, don't just speak about it, and get something done. But it has to be done, of course. It has to be done effectively. And I just, as I say, I don't have a problem with what you're trying to achieve here. I know that we've got Tom Lancaster on board. He's a great cyclist, so we know where that's going to go. He's been the Farnham Cycling Forum for as long as I can remember. So we're all going to be cycling round. I gather that East Street now, they want a cycle route right through the pedestrian bit. Sounds a bit, what should we say, unsafe to me. But basically, when you're doing something like this and you're putting street furniture in somebody else's town, will you please ask the town council as a minimum and talk to the people there to get some guidance on what's acceptable in any particular place? Because it is important. If we designate as a borough conservation areas, we have a duty to protect as a borough conservation areas, as well as all the other things. Not everything, please. Not every single thing has to be just based on whether or not it helps solve the climate emergency. Shall I just say it one more time? Climate emergency. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor. Members of the Executive, I have Councillor Follows, followed by Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. It's an interesting way to start. I do sometimes wonder if Carol was in a burning building, whether she would canvass for a breadth of opinion about what to do with it. Because to be honest, I think by the time you'd ask the third person, that would be that. I'm also really loving the great value of aesthetics that petrol-driven cars, their infrastructure and car parks have in conservation areas. They're something that I actually go to visit towns to view because they're just that good. So if we're saying that we're okay doing that, but actually you don't like the look of electric cars and their infrastructure, I mean, first off, I think just a bit of a reality check is necessary. I also want to challenge this notion that towns and parishes aren't included in discussions about this. I've been involved in at least 3 very lengthy discussions at Godalming Town Council as its leader, with Councillor Williams and several other councillors of this executive and of your own party, having very lengthy discussions about this, as we have, by the way, at the local committee and various other places. And so when we're talking about conservation areas, I do sometimes wonder what perspective you're coming from, because yes, you might have prevented and this is subjective to, an ugly piece of electric car charging infrastructure, but in the long run, you've actually protected the existence of the area in question in the grand scheme of things. And I'm sure people in coastal areas value the aesthetics of their conservation areas too, and will also be concerned when they can't see them anymore because they're underwater. So I think we just have to think about, you know, not just us and ourselves. And as I can't create a little pocket dimension that somehow prevents me from being impacted by climate change, we do have to think about these things slightly more radically. I actually do have an issue with electric cars because I have an issue with their batteries, because their batteries are horrendously unenvironmental. They are mined from rare earths that are obviously not replaced. They are often mined in conditions that are tantamount to slave labor. And I have a huge issue with them. I also have issues, and going back to UCOG earlier, in that application, somebody mentioned a phrase that I had to look up, which was called grey hydrogen, which is where you generate hydrogen from fossil fuels, which was a new one for me as well. So I do think that this is a step in the right direction. The technology is changing all the time, and we have to not let fear of being left behind or being behind the curve stop us from doing anything at all, as I think there are plenty of people who would rather we did nothing and just wait and see. I mean, we'll wait and see forever, effectively, in these sorts of scenarios. So I think we have to make sure that we keep everybody engaged. We have to make sure that people are consulted about their areas of their towns and their parishes. Of course we do. That is something that I do think we are doing, though. And I hope at Farnham you have had that opportunity. I'm sure that you should have. Certainly in Godalming we have. So I do support this, not because it's going to solve everything and fix the whole climate emergency, but because it is a step in the right direction, and we have to do that. And these are a lot of things also that I think an ONS committee particularly should be looking more about the environment in a wider sense than just the aesthetics of an electric car charging point in Farnham. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Merriweather, followed by Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. Well, I might be the only person here who was actually born at a petrol station. It's not the most aesthetic place. I don't take my kids there to enjoy it for its aesthetics or anything else. But to answer Councillor Coburn's question, the reason you don't have petrol pumps lining the streets like lampposts is because they have a nasty habit of being attached to very large reservoirs of flammable fuel that are an incredible fire risk, which electric charging points have the fundamental difference with. They don't have to be, they can be connected. So hopefully that's a little bit of knowledge advanced. And of course, the other thing, of course, is that electric chargers don't need huge fuel tankers to come and visit them every once in a while to top up those reservoirs that are sitting underneath. So I've never done any research on that. That was just something that occurred to me when she asked the question. The other thing that occurred to me is that it's not really manufacturers who are unilaterally going about building all these electric cars out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing it because they are being nudged very forcefully by governments to do that, who are setting them targets, who are telling them, don't bother making any diesel cars anymore because we won't let you sell them. Don't bother making any petrol cars anymore because we won't sell them, because we get it. So the governments get it. There is a climate emergency and the manufacturers are being nudged very forcefully to change their habits. And on the final point on consultation, like Councillor Coburn, I am a town councillor. I represent my ward on the town and the borough council. And I am supporting this because I believe that my residents would want me to.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor MacLeod, followed by Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Leader. I put my hand up actually to also talk about the Councillor Coburn's point about petrol. And I have to say, first of all, I'm sure she wasn't seriously suggesting that we should have petrol pumps at every corner. But my point I would like to make, however, about that point is that petrol has got one advantage over electricity, that by having in petrol stations, you can refuel your car very quickly. You know, you can do it in 10, 15 minutes, and completely. Electricity's got the opposite problem. Although it's easy to put it anywhere, and you can have it in every street corner, it takes a while to actually charge up the car, particularly if you don't have the particularly fast chargers, which are very expensive. The sort of ones that are going to go in street corners are the sort that will take hours to charge up the cars and be left overnight. And that's really for people who can't have charging in their own drives. And ultimately, that's going to be important because everybody's going to have an electric car ultimately. So whether we like it or not, we're going to have these chargers distributed about streets and so on. But there's more modern technology where there's a lot less visible and a lot less intrusive, and that will obviously come along. So I'm pretty sure, Carrie, weren't actually suggesting petrol pumps at every corner, but you have to recognise, I'm afraid, the way things are going, we're going to need these chargers all over the place. Not everybody's got a drive that they can charge their car at home, and so they're going to be necessary in car parks, and they're going to be necessary in the streets, so that people who can charge their cars up overnight, it's coming whether we like it or not from the aesthetics point of view, but that will be improved as time goes by. So that's all I wanted to say on the subject, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer, followed by Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Leader.
I'd like
Sorry,
to.
Councillor Palmer.
We'll just keep the best bit for the end. But I want to congratulate Councillor Coburn on stirring us up, and I think it was part of her intention. I mean, as the portfolio holder for parking, I'm enchanted by the idea that the parking in Farnham is a site of natural beauty. I hadn't noticed this up to now, but more seriously, those of us who are trying to take the climate emergency seriously, as I think most of us would say we are, we tend to face two opposite criticisms. One is that we're just issuing airy-fairy generalities and we're not really doing anything very much. And the other is when we actually come to do something, then perhaps people say, well, it's not really necessary to go that far. And there is a balance to be struck. And the problem that colleagues have raised is that by 2030, new car sales of fossil fuels will be illegal. And at that point, if we haven't provided a good network of charging points, we will be doing a real disservice to residents in Waverley, because they will no longer be able to get a new petrol car, and they will be forced to buy a car which is difficult to recharge. So I think it's reasonable that we address this chicken and egg issue by making progress on recharging points. And I think it's a sensible middle way to do it. We're not proposing to impose charging points on every street, but where we have the opportunity to put them in, I think it makes sense and it's a reasonable service to our residents. I hope Councillor Coburn will, on reflection, accept that that's a reasonable way forward. Thank you.
Councillor Townsend, followed by Councillor Rosamond.
Thank you, Leader. I was very keen to get in there. I'm terribly sorry, Councillor Palmer. There's a few points. First of all, I don't think, as Councillor Coburn said, that we are missing the point at all. And also her comment about beware the zealot. Well, I think that usually that's said by someone that holds equally firm views as well. So I think I stand in good company there with Councillor Coburn, perhaps. One or two things, as I said. In Cranley recently, there was almost a fight for the electric charging point within the car park at Stockman Square, with people wanting more and moaning that there were people overstaying their welcome on the charging point. And I think that perhaps we need to recognise that electric cars and the number of electric cars are increasing. And as Councillor Palmer says, we need to meet residents' needs. And as already been said by Councillor Merriweather, yes, the reason why we don't have lots of petrol power points is because of the huge reservoir of petrol underneath them. But on a more serious note, I think that what we need to bear in mind as well, and why we are doing this, is not only because of the climate emergency, but also because of air quality as well. And we're very aware in Farnham, we've got an AQMA there, air quality management area there, and that 471 deaths are attributed to the air quality within Surrey each year. And I think that's a very sobering point. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that and that we try to introduce more electric charging points to encourage more electric vehicles and therefore reduce down the amount of pollution in our air. And I think that is a really important thing for residents. And I would be very, very supportive of this policy for that point alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rosamond.
Thank you, Leader. I'm a real history buff. I love my history. And I agree that a conservation area is really important in preserving and protecting the past. But with the greatest of respect, we're not going to have a future unless we start to make changes now. We passed a climate emergency, and part of that was talking about EV charging points. My youngest son, sorry, my dog's just trying to break in through the garden door. My youngest son lived in Bath for a number of years, and I think you probably all would agree that Bath is an amazingly beautiful city with a huge conservation area, and they have been pushing forward with electric vehicle charging points since they declared the climate emergency in 2019. So it's not just Waverley that are thinking about this, it's across the whole country. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams, would you like to sum up before I put this to the executive?
Yeah, very briefly, just as a zealot, as what I've been described as, I assume describing, me as a zealot. I suppose I'm a zealot because, I don't want my children and grandchildren to exist on an uninhabitable planet. I think this is pretty, it's as pretty stark as that. Again, I do like the phrase that Councillor Coburn, and I'm thankful to my colleagues for addressing the issues that Councillor Coburn raised, but Councillor Coburn mentioned the phrase "fine words, butter no parsnips," and I quite like that expression. But I would say to Councillor Coburn that fine words and fine sentiments should be what underpin our actions, so that we are zealots by deed as well as by word. And I think fine words and fine sentiments are rather better than sort of somewhat bizarre and pusillanimous statements such as, and I quote, "climate change is a slight problem." I'm grateful to Councillor Merriweather and others for explaining the difference between petrol pumps and EV charging points. I think there's significant difference there, and I hope Councillor Coburn is now happy that the need for on-street EV charging is somewhat different from any case that might be put for on-street petrol pumps. I do wish to emphasize that I think, seriously, the direction of travel is pretty clear. We've seen that exponential rise in electric vehicles in Waverley. We will see that rise continuing. We do not want to stop or inhibit that, and that is why, seriously, we do need to be anticipating demand and being ahead of the curve rather than behind it. And that, as I said at the outset, is entirely what this paper is about.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I put this to the executive for the vote, having listened to what's been said, I am going to declare an interest, as I have driven an electric car for the last 6 years. I do, however, have my own electric charging point, so I don't think I have any pecuniary interest in these electric chargers, but I do have an interest. So I am going to abstain in this vote. And for that reason, and just to add a little bit of lightness to a tone that's getting a little serious, I also hate parsnips. So, members of the executive, can I have a red or a green, please? And I will abstain.
Thank you, Leader. I've got nine green ticks there, so that's carried.
Thank you very much, Fiona. The next item is service plans. It has Leader to introduce. I've assiduously read all 70 pages. You'll be delighted to know I'm going to comment on every one. No, I think I'll limit it to one page, where we have 70 pieces of paper here, and somewhere or other buried therein you will find an intention to attempt to go to a less paper-intensive council in the relatively near future. I'll avoid the word paperless because it gets people angry. So basically, I think this has been through every ONS committee. It's certainly been looked at by executive before, so I don't intend to say any more. So I don't have any speakers on this. So if anyone on the executive wishes to speak, otherwise I will put it to the vote. Right, thank you. I will put it to the vote then. Could I have a red or a green, please?
That's all in favour, Leader, so that's passed.
Thank you, Fiona, very much. We now move on to the last item, additional restrictions. Oh no, additional restrictions grant. COVID business support, which takes up slightly less than the last 70 pages, and Councillor Townsend to introduce.
Thank you, Leader. In my regular meetings with the Chambers of Commerce from the 4 main settlements, we have very sadly seen the closure of some of our high street businesses, and I'm sure that most people here will have witnessed that as well. However, we have also had some fairly positive reports with signs of new independent businesses opening up. And I know that the Economic Development team is working hard to ensure that we provide assistance and access to help through partner organisations as well. And we have some exciting new business prospects as well in the area of gaming and also robotics, which we are working with as well. So it isn't all bad news. However, moving on to the grant situation, I'd like to first of all thank Councillor Merriweather and the finance team for all their hard work in setting up the systems and distributing the grants to our businesses so quickly, and I know that's been very much appreciated. Over 22 million of COVID support business grants have been distributed to businesses across the borough between April and October last year, and since November the team has operated a further 6 business support schemes. And one of these is the additional restrictions grant, which was targeted mainly at businesses that did not meet the criteria for the other support packages. The government guidance within this allows local authorities to allocate part of this funding towards wider business support measures to help our business communities recover. Waverley received an initial £2.5 million, and the proposal within the recommendation is a retention of £500,000 to support strategic projects, which are outlined on Annex 1 at page numbered 173. This outlines that in the main we will be concentrating within these strategic projects on 4 key areas, and those include retail, hospitality and town centres, which also include tourism, the visitor economy and leisure as well. The second area is business diversification and startups, which include the film sector, and as a council we have within Local Plan Part 2 given our support to the film industry. And then thirdly, the digital connectivity. As you may know, we have a fibre spine being proposed. We're working with the EM3 LEP on that across the borough, and this part of the funding would help to fund feasibility studies to see some spurs off of that fibre spine for Farnham and also for Cranley. And then finally, we want to expand our business intelligence to further inform our decision-making processes. So I very much hope that the executive will be able to support these recommendations, and that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Leader. Completely support this. I'm obviously a town centre councillor myself, along with Councillor Rosamond for the centre of Godalming, and some of the things that the economic development team have been doing with the money that they've been able to get hold of during this period has been just extremely helpful and will allow us to make more informed decisions about what we're going to do next. I think whenever we look at this sort of thing, I feel inclined to always mention that the Borough Council receives something like 4 or 5 pence in the pound on business rates, and towns and parishes receive exactly none. So having the ability for any money to be spent from the centre to help everywhere and in terms of business support and look at these wider strategic aspects of business support would be welcome at any time, and especially in the post-COVID environment that we're about to enter to as town centres unlock from April the 12th. So I very much welcome this, and again, thank you to the team for all of their ongoing support for the town centres of Waverley.
Thank you, councillors. I have no more hands up at the moment. Do you want to sum up after that solid criticism of your proposal, Councillor Councillor Townsend, or shall we go to the vote?
Thank you, Leader. I just would like to say that the economic development team is very small, but they have been working so hard, and I would just like to obviously extend my thanks to them for all the support they have given me and to the invaluable support. And I know from the feedback from businesses and from the chambers that this has been invaluable to businesses during this time. So that's just my quick summing up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now put the recommendation to the executive. Could I have red or green, please?
That's all in favour, Leader, so that's passed.
Thank you very much indeed, Fiona. That appears to me to come to the end of the agenda. I see no reason to go into exempt. So thank you all very much for your attendance and your interesting comments and lively debates. And I wish you all well, and we can head off for something that's not in a plastic bottle and not water. Thank you very much.